I'm a super big fan of the documentary hypothesis, especially the version called the neo-documentary hypothesis, which is championed by biblical scholars like Joel Baden and Jeffrey Stackert. I've responded to a couple videos by Mike from Inspiring Philosophy where he criticizes the documentary hypothesis. And one of my most consistent concerns with Mike's videos is he doesn't seem to directly engage the work of any proponents of the documentary hypothesis. And anytime we criticize a position, but we don't directly engage with proponents of that position, we have a tendency to mischaracterize the position and engage in straw man arguments. And unfortunately, I think there's a rather egregious example of using straw man arguments in Mike's recent video on Genesis 1 and 2. Around the 10-minute mark of his YouTube video, he launches into the following argument.
Benjamin Kilker notes we can find P elements and motifs throughout the Eden narrative. First, we see sanctuary symbolism throughout Genesis 2 that aligns with priestly texts concerning the arrangement of the tabernacle.
Mike wants to argue that there are priestly themes associated with the P source in the narratives conventionally assigned to the J source, and as a result, we can't distinguish between these two hypothetical sources on the basis of theme. Now, this would be a devastating argument against the documentary hypothesis if it were the case that proponents of the documentary hypothesis distinguish between the different hypothetical sources on the basis of themes. But they don't really, and Mike should know that. And Mike should know this because he's aware of the work of Joel Baden. In Mike's video criticizing the use of the documentary hypothesis to explain the flood stories in Genesis, Mike specifically cites the work of Joel Baden and his book, The Composition of the Pentateuch. Now, I think the book, The Composition of the Pentateuch, is the strongest stated version of the documentary hypothesis that we have today. And in the introductory sections of that book, Baden is very clear that themes cannot and should not be used to make distinctions between the various sources of the documentary hypothesis. Baden says, and I quote, "These thematic and structural features of the four documents emerge only once the literary analysis done on the basis of narrative flow has been completed. The recognition of overarching themes in a given source is a secondary stage of analysis, not a primary one. The analysis cannot begin with the identification of themes and then proceed to the discovery of the documents. This is because the themes are, for the most part, not unique to a given source, but rather are more prominent in one source than the others, or differently configured." A little bit later, he says, "In order to understand the themes of any of the sources must first be separated on the more objective grounds of narrative continuity." Baden then goes on for the rest of the book to successfully identify and distinguish between the four conventional sources of the documentary hypothesis on the basis of narrative continuity, not theme. And as a result, this argument by Mike about theme that occupies the entire latter half of his video amounts to nothing. Hopefully, in the future, Mike can more closely engage with proponents of the documentary hypothesis and thereby avoid wasting all this time and energy and considerable amount of research in a straw man argument. I think it's really important for Bible readers in general and for Christians in particular to come to terms with the documentary hypothesis and with the critical biblical scholarship that gave birth to it. The documentary hypothesis is a premier example of the Bible's multivocality and something that we absolutely need to consider when we speak about the Bible's inspiration.